Well, the book of Esther is a story of wonderful storytelling. It's a great story. It's a tragic story. It's a sad story, but it's a great story. And we left off in a situation where the queen needed to act. And it was sort of a strange thing because she requested that everyone who's associated with the Jewish people and even the women of the harem would fast for 3 days on her behalf. Now, we didn't really know if on her behalf meant Esther just wanted to save her own neck, or if on her behalf was maybe the king would grant her wisdom. As we turn to chapter 5, we're starting to see the answer to that. And again, it's subtle. It's sort of buried in the narrative, in the story. But we're seeing that Esther is not someone who is just some passive, foolish, arm jewelry for the king, but she actually has a brain. She's pretty smart. She reads the situation well, and she's figured out how to survive in the kingdom and still how to be a means that the Lord is going to use to save his people. And so when we look at this story of Esther, we sort of wonder, how is this woman who's been led around from man to man, right? The eunuch told her how to survive. Her cousin's been telling her how to survive. We haven't really heard her talk for herself. We see a problem with Vashti where she was self-willed and exerted herself or asserted herself a little bit, said no, that's all she said, to an absolutely absurd request of a drunk king. She was kicked out. We learned the decrees, when they are made, are set in stone. So we say, okay, we're making this claim that Esther is wise. How is she going to navigate this, where she's going to save her people, the Jewish people, as a means that God's using, and at the same time not expedite or accelerate their demise? How is she going to do this? What can she really do? As we follow the story, we marvel at Esther's wisdom, because we see Esther's trouble and where she's upset and what she's trying to do. We hear Esther's request and what she makes of the king. And then we find the ultimate challenge that this is not going to be so easy, as this narrative is sort of setting the stage and sort of not really at the climax, but building to the climax, I'd argue, in Act 2 of Esther's book. And so let's begin with Esther's trouble. She has a plan, and now it's time to put the plan in motion. Now, I call to your attention something in narrative writing that's important when you read this in Scripture. Notice how the narrative slows down. We hear on the third day, right? It doesn't say, on the third day, Esther went to the king. No, right? The narrative slows down, it builds suspense, and we're drawn into the story. It's on the third day. Esther puts on her royal clothes, and the intention is that we feel the weight. Because in a matter of moments from verse 1, Esther is either going to be successful or dead. Those are our options. And so you can understand, with Esther getting dressed in the royal garments, she's not just trying to show up as the beauty queen of the kingdom. She's emphasizing, I am the queen of Persia, and I have the royal garments to prove it. I have the royal garb, and I'm going to see if I can get the king's attention. Now, as she dons and puts on the royal garments, the narrative again is set at a slow pace. She puts on her royal garments. She goes to the inner courts of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king is on, right? So it's describing all these things. And the picture of this is calling to our attention what it is in Persia. As queen, you think, well, she could just march right into the king's throne and she could walk right up to the throne and say, hey, I have a request. The problem is Esther has said the king hasn't requested her for 30 days. The challenge is it seems that there's a new woman in the harem who has captured the king's attention. Esther is not the new thing anymore. So that's setting a stage. Esther doesn't know where she stands. She could be cut out of the kingdom. She could be executed, right? Remember that picture. And the picture we have to have before us is you have the king on an elevated throne. You have the guards with the axes around the king. And if you would come into the king's quarters as he's on the throne, the guards with the axes could dispatch you at the king's command. And they're not going to take you out and give you a talking to. That will be the very last action of your life. So this is a stressful thing. We say, okay, so what's Esther going to do? Notice Esther doesn't just barge right into the throne room, but she stands outside. So what would happen is you'd have the king on the throne, his door would be open, and there would be sort of a court or a courtyard outside. And you could stand in that courtyard and just kind of walk around. So you're not in the king's quarters, but she's making sure she's in the sight and vision of the king. And as the king notices her, he calls her Queen Esther. This is a great thing. Then as the king calls attention to Queen Esther, we notice that he extends the golden scepter. Now the imagery here is if the king would extend his golden scepter to someone who came into his presence or near the king, he's saying to the guards, it's okay. I want to listen to this person. You don't need to dispatch them. This is safe. This is fine. You don't need to be on alert. I'm giving this person the floor. Touching the scepter means that you're honoring the king. You're saying, yes, I honor you as king. I will be respectful. I'm not going to do anything that's silly. I'm going to make a reasonable request. Now, not only does the king refer to her as Queen Esther, who's standing outside and wins favor of his sight, but the English says, what troubles you? Which is a valid translation of the Hebrew, but it's more, what is your concern? Or no, well, excuse me. The English says, what do you desire? What do you want? The Hebrew is more of what troubles you? What is your concern? Which is more loaded with compassion. So it's not the king looking upon a queen who's just kind of naggy, right? She's just always making requests. Here comes the queen again. What do you want? Right? That's not the tone. The tone is a king who's looking at the queen and actually having a tenderness to her. It's a king looking upon his wife and saying, I actually do have love for you. What's troubling you? What's the problem? You seem upset. Now, Greek sources and historians report that when Esther made this request, she was falling down, she was weak, she was overcome with anxiety and stress, which we can understand. And the Greek sources make this even more tender, that the king actually gets out of his throne, goes to Esther and kind of helps her out. Now, is that story exaggerated? I don't know. But the reality is the Hebrew text is also telling us that this isn't just, what do you want? Why are you bothering me? I'm not going to kill you this time. It's more, how can I help you? How can I appease you? Why are you upset? I really care about you. Now, her request that's leading us to the point of the request is a strange request. Because when she turns to the king, she asks him to come to a banquet. And so this leads us to then, when the king interacts with her and offers her up to half of his kingdom, and she says, well, come to my banquet. You know, what is she requesting? What is she doing? And it becomes even more problematic because she requests that Haman comes with the king. And so what is this request? Why is she doing this? Well, notice what happens. And she sets the banquet, which again, she's going to have servants. She's going to have people who are preparing the banquet. It's not that Esther is slaving away over a meal, but she has this banquet prepared. Notice that as Haman, prior to this, who had the king's signet ring. So this means Haman can make decrees with the authority of the king, right? We covered that. So he's a pretty prestigious individual. Might even think that he's in a position to usurp or overpower the king. But notice Esther makes this mere request. The king says, what troubles you? Esther says, I want to have you at a banquet and I want Haman to come. And the king all of a sudden turns and says, get Haman over to the banquet. We're meeting with the queen. This is telling us that right now Esther has the king's attention. He drops everything, whatever's going on, and he says, fine, I'm going to go to the banquet with this queen. I love this queen. We're going to meet together, and you bring Haman over here. Now we hear this and we say, well, what's going on? Haman wants to execute all the Jews. That's his desire. As far as we know, Haman still does not know Esther's identity. But Mordecai is tied to her close enough that the women of the harem know that Mordecai is dressed in sackcloth, and they report that to Esther. So there's at least enough knowledge of her relationship to Mordecai that this is pretty risky. Because if Haman really is the second person in command, what does he know? So we can understand Esther has probably a little bit of anxiety here. And so she invites this man to come. Now, she takes care of all the details. And as she meets with Haman, we may wonder what's going on. So as she gets Haman, she interacts with him, and the king again turns to Esther and says, what is your wish? It shall be granted to you even half the kingdom. It shall be fulfilled. I mean, this is a grand gesture. And you hear this and you say, okay, well, if the king's willing to give up to half the kingdom, my thinking is right here, I would start acting and saying, okay, I want Canaan. And I want Canaan as your kingdom. First thing. Second thing, I want all the Jews in Persia to be moved over to Canaan. And I want to own that. I want to be over it. I want that to be a place of refuge. And all the Jews who are left here in 11 months, Haman's rule can still go forward. But at least I want all the Jews moved out immediately, and I want us all to go over to Canaan. You think that'd be a very easy thing to do, and it would save the people. It'd be very pragmatic, and it would be something that, again, reveals to us that the Lord is caring for his people. But we have to understand this story is not a human story. And even though God's name is not mentioned in the book, there is a deeper message in the story, a deeper tension that's going on. And the real question in the book of Esther is, can the Lord triumph? Will the seed of the woman be victorious over the seed of the serpent? It's not a question of, can the seed of the woman survive? Can the seed of the woman live? But will the Lord prevail over the serpent seed? So if Esther strikes now, where pragmatically we say the iron is hot, while the iron is hot, you better strike, you better act. And yes, she can in a very pragmatic way make sure that the people live, but we don't really know the reality of this. We don't know if this is really going to show that the Lord can protect and be a shield and defender for his people, which is the very thing he said to Abraham. This would mean that at best God could say, hey, I can probably guarantee you some life and existence, but I can't guarantee you victory. What kind of God would that be? Is that a God we'd want to serve? Is that a God that really builds confidence and where we say, yes, this is a God that I'm going to follow because this is a God who can at least give me some survival, but I'm not really going to be victorious. And so you have to understand this is the driving force behind the story. Can God triumph over the serpent seed? This is also telling us with Esther that she's not just here to save her pretty face, if you will, as the text has presented. That Esther is actually thinking along deeper lines. And as she's thinking along deeper lines, she's not here just trying to survive. She actually has a thought process. She has a plan. We don't know the plan, which is telling us now when we hear of Esther commanding everyone to fast, that as she's doing this, she's not just fasting so she can survive. If her goal was just to survive, this request would accomplish it. I just want to get out of town. I don't want to be executed. I'm Jewish, right? She could do that reveal. Just get me out of here. I want to survive. I want peace. I want protection from the king. She doesn't do that. So the fasting is communicating to us that Esther really is turning to the Lord and asking for wisdom. Now, the issue of having Haman here, it actually gets answered more. Commentators speculate a lot, but I think verse 12 tells us exactly why she brought Haman there. Haman's own words betray who he is. I'll just cut through the chase and not go through all the different theories of the commentaries. But it seems most likely Esther is trying to size up Haman. She's trying to figure out what makes him tick. I speculate this is what makes him tick, but I don't know if this really makes him tick. I need to see him face to face. So I think that's one of the main things, because remember what we've seen so far. And this sets a scary tone. The narrative opens up with a banquet. The queen is exiled from the kingdom at a banquet when she stands up to the king. Here we have another banquet, and we have a queen dictating everything, and we think, well, is this queen going to prevail, or is she going to be like Vashti? So far, she's prevailing, but she needs to be cautious. And we're seeing where wisdom and what it means to try to discern what's pleasing unto the Lord is operating. She understands this kingdom. She understands how the king can be moved around. She also understands the king is flippant. Remember how it opens. Bring Vashti here. He makes an absurd request. He's in a drunken state. She says no. He says, oh, send her away. And then it's just a few verses later, but I really miss the queen. I want the queen, right? And he's like a little child just moments later after having this broad decree that no woman's going to stand up to a man, right? Remember that was sent out to the whole empire, everyone in their own language. No woman's going to tell us how it is. And then he says, but I want the queen back. Remember how his advisors manipulate him into the beauty contest. Esther understands this man is easily manipulated. If Haman's second in command and desires to kill all the Jews, she can't just make a decree, because remember what they said, when a decree is made in Persia, it is set in stone. So they got to figure out, how do you operate in the context of this decree without the king appearing weak? And at the same time, how do you operate so Haman doesn't go behind her back and manipulate the king to have her executed with her cousin before they can figure out how to preserve the Jewish people? So Esther understands, A, I need to figure out who Haman is. B, I need to figure out how to operate in the context of the king. And C, I need to make Haman think we're allies, right? So you have the king and queen of Persia inviting you to a banquet and no one else? Well, that's pretty prestigious, isn't it? That's what he says in verse 12. Look at me. I'm the guy that goes to the banquet with only the king and the queen. I'm an important fella in this kingdom, right? So he wants everyone to know how significant he is, which tells us Esther sort of read a situation pretty well. So the beauty queen that we thought was maybe at best a sorority girl kind of has a brain. She's pretty smart, pretty wise. The Lord is using her. Seems that the fast that they underwent and the prayers that they underwent before the Lord's starting to work out his purpose through this woman. And so her request is, I want you to come to a banquet with Haman. So again, there you go. Here we are having another banquet. We're significant. Just the three of us are going to be wined and dined as important people. And so the scene fades away, and that's what we see. That's what we're looking forward to. But now there's a challenge that's presented, and we see who Haman is. He goes and he goes home. He's in a great mood. In other words, he's had a great banquet. He's had some wine. He's kind of happy. He's in a great place in life. And then he sees that rotten Mordecai. And that's sort of how the text presents it. There's that rotten Mordecai. Here I am, the guy who just had the banquet with the queen. Here's that guy. He won't even bow to me. He's not even intimidated by me. Who does that guy think he is? I just dined with the king and the queen, and that guy won't even bow to me? We're going to deal with him. And so this becomes rather funny to me because on the one hand, Haman is having a banquet with the king and queen. And he's jealous of a guy who has to deliver a message to his cousin through the complication of a eunuch and can't even sit down and have a meal with his own family. That's not Haman. This guy's a threat. He won't bow to me. I don't like this guy. We need to deal with him. So here's a funny thing. The advisors, remember the decree, no woman's going to tell us how it is. Esther's called the banquet. It's called another banquet. The king's coming, being led around by this. Haman's being led around by this banquet, right? Again, another subtle thing in the book of Esther. It's kind of funny. Now you have this man, he calls his advisors, his friends. Notice that there's males first. Notice the order here. And then his wife. And he runs through how significant he is. Oh, I have so much money. So many sons, my name is guaranteed, right? That's why these men would brag about their sons, because the more sons you have, the more of a guarantee of your legacy, because your name's going to continue, right? Which tells us that if he has any daughters, he has no respect for women. Book of Job recounts how many sons and daughters he has, and it calls attention to what? His daughters were the most beautiful in the land, right? So Job, a godly man, as is presented in the text, values women. This man, we don't know if he has daughters or not. So again, he's asserting his dominance. I'm significant. I'm a guy. I have sons. I'm important. I'm wealthy, significant. And verse 12 becomes so clear and significant of how Esther has read this situation. Even now the queen and the king have prepared a feast. I alone dine with them, right? So this is one of those guys, I don't know if you ever watched Brian Regan, but he talks about the joke of landing on the moon, where you have the guy at the dinner party. It's always talking, one-upping everyone. And Brian said, I'd really love to be the guy that says, oh yeah, I landed on the moon, top that, right? Haman's that guy who's at the dinner party where you're just like, with this guy, just stop already. You've done great things, wonderful, so proud of you. Can somebody else have a part of the conversation now? Right? That's how he comes off. I'm so important, so significant. But now he reveals what's ruined his day. Mordecai. Mordecai is a guy who just won't bow to me. And this is the thing that upsets him. And you wonder why the advisors don't turn to him and say, you had a banquet with the king and queen. You're like the second person in command. You got the king's signet ring. Why do you care about this guy? He's just some guy. In 11 months, he's going to be exterminated by your own decree. Why do you care? Notice it's Again, I talked about when we started this book, the dark humor in the book. There's dark humor here. That the first thing is where there's a description of having this pole that's 50 cubits. As I mentioned, the method of execution, and I don't know even how to keep this so G-rated, but the method of execution in the Persian Empire is brutal. It makes crucifixion look like just kids play. I mean, crucifixion is humane. Basically, they would cut a tree, sharpen it, and place someone on it and let them die slowly. And his wife suggests that he gets this tree that's 50 cubits, basically 70 feet. The largest structure I think we found in Persia is probably of a peak of maybe 40 feet. And so the point is that Mordecai is going to be above the tallest building. Now, in the Hebrew language, there is a certain way in which the book of Esther is taken in sort of a comic book. I want to be careful how I say that. It is inspired. But when we think of sort of a comic book type narrative, things are exaggerated. And this measurement is an exaggeration. Now, we might say, well, you're playing fast and loose with the text and you're not taking this literally. It's actually worse. Because it's not so much about the height of the pole or the height of the execution. It's more communicating the depth of the anger and the hatred and how much he despises Mordecai, which is communicating to us that this is more than just Esther trying to keep a people alive. It's more than just Haman angry that a man won't bow to him. This is a cosmic battle. That's the intention here, that the exaggeration is driving home the reality. In a few moments, we're going to see the line of David, right? The Messiah's line, or the line of Saul. Which one's going to prevail? In other words, a true kingship, false kingship that went away. And that's sort of putting this loosely, or another way of saying is seed of the woman over the seed of the serpent. Who's going to prevail? Who's going to win? How is the Lord really going to do this? And again, Mordecai comes from the line of Saul, but we think of Saul being displaced and those sorts of things going on, or those themes. But the point is that exaggeration, the cosmic battle, who's going to win? We do receive a little bit of an answer here, and this is part of the dark humor as well. Not only the exaggeration, who makes a suggestion? When he calls the people, it's all his male friends, and then his wife. But his male friends never talk. It's his wife who now says, hey, I got a great idea. How about we do this? She's the one that hatches the plan, tells him what to do, and he says, that's great. Let's do it. And so you're seeing again that subtlety where you have the decree going out. No woman's going to dominate the man. Esther called the banquet, called the second banquet. King is coming to both banquets. Haman's joyfully attending both banquets. Seems like the seed of the woman's triumphing. Now we have his wife giving this decree, making this decision. He's complying with it, which again implies seed of the woman is triumphing. The intention is that as we read this, we should sort of be chuckling that, oh, here's a great empire filled with guys who make these decrees set in stone, but none of the decrees are really followed. It doesn't really matter that the king of this age does not have the authority of the king of heaven. And so this then, in conclusion, when we ask, when his empire has passed a decree, how do we know Esther will prevail? Because we see the absurdity of his empire. Persia's decrees do not stand anymore, do they? And even Persia's decree that went out to the empire, to each man in his own language, written in stone, if you will, or written down, or as they present it, written in stone, it's not even followed. Which tells us that the seed of the serpent cannot build something that is lasting and enduring because it doesn't have the teeth, pun intended, to sink in and make it so those decrees stand. But the living God, he makes a decree Even when he is silent, even in the midst of his B team, even in the midst of the people that have compromised who they are in terms of the Christian faith or in terms of their Jewish identity, and he can still prevail. And it shows us that when the Lord makes a decree, it comes to pass because God is such a sovereign ruler that he's not content just to make it so his people can kind of live or sort of survive. But he understands the depth and complexity of sin. And it's far more than just doing a couple Band-Aids or a couple patches to fix it. It needs to be eradicated at its core. And this narrative, even as this is a bridging narrative in the tension of the book, is a significant narrative because it's assuring us that the seed of the woman will triumph and God's decree has not failed. Even as we have this tragic plan to do this the next day. As we read this, we can see God will prevail. He's still working in the context of his people. And we might say, well, this is kind of neat and fascinating, but I go back to, again, the disciples. When Christ is on the cross, are they bold? I mean, when Christ is in the grave, they're locked in a room, hiding out, wondering what their fate is. They don't think God has overcome. And when Christ appears, they think it's a ghost. They don't think it's a resurrected Lord. The reality is, as human beings, we are reminded of how small we are and how small we make our God to be. I'm not saying he's small. I'm saying we make him small. We try to contain him in a little box and we say, oh boy, God cannot overcome this problem. It's far too big. And the Lord gives us the book of Esther to give us a rich assurance. If I can do this with my B team, imagine how more significant it is when Christ is raised from the dead. And so in terms of our Christian context, no matter what we face in life, let us always think back, but my Lord is raised from the dead. The serpent cannot prevail. His doom is sealed. My victory is guaranteed because my Lord has overcome. Let us then not fear the things of this world, the kingdoms of this world, the rulers of this age, whatever it may be, because our victory is guaranteed in our Redeemer. Let us proceed in that confidence. Amen. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We're Belgrade URC, a Reformed Bible-believing church in the Gallatin Valley in Belgrade, Montana. We meet Sundays at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., and we love to see you worshiping and fellowshipping with us each Sunday. Learn more about our church at belgradeurc.com, where you can subscribe to our podcasts and use our sermon archive. Until we meet again, may the Lord's blessing and peace be upon you.